You can't really have a conversation about music without having a conversation about culture, without having a conversation about how you understand yourself. Being queer in Singapore and then also being a musician in Singapore who's also queer, it's like an always changing journey. There's like 1,001 things to think about at any one point.
Hi, I'm Hazel Savage, and today my guest is JJ, also known as KEAT, the classically trained vocalist, songwriter, and electronic music producer from Singapore. In this episode, we'll talk about how culture and language impact songwriting, JJ's experience as a queer artist, and writing for K-pop. Okay, so I know you as JJ,
yes.
But when you're meeting someone for the first time, how do you like to introduce yourself?
I'm JJ. I'm a singer-songwriter from Singapore. I also have an artist project, and I go by the name KEAT. I make synth pop music, at least up until now I do. And it's just this fun, energetic Netflix rom-com kind of energy. That's kind of the state of mind I've been at for the past 2 years or so. And I've been making music for as long as I can remember.
Nice. So when it's written down, to me, I read it as KEAT, but it's KEAT.
Yes, KEAT.
And where does the word come from?
So KEAT, well, JJ stands for my Mandarin name, which is my given name from my parents. And given that it is a Chinese name, that it kind of goes Jingjie, which is Jingjie, so JJ.
Yeah, and now I was going to pronounce it Jingji.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And I'm sorry, that's my English pronunciation. You said it much, much better.
No, but I think I've just gotten used to people calling me JJ because it's just so much easier to remember at this point. Of course, there are moments where I'm like, no, this is my name. You have to say it right. But most of the time, I just prefer JJ for some, just kind of fosters a little bit more intimacy with people.
And where did you get the name KEAT from?
So KEAT is actually the Teochew way of saying jie.
Oh.
Yeah, so it kind of lends some kind of homage, to my roots, because I am Teochew and that's a dialect that I'm from. I can't really speak it as well, but I can kind of understand when people speak it. And it's kind of like I would like to believe it's in the southern part of China.
So there's actually like a through road all the way from your given name to JJ to your artist name.
Yeah.
There's kind of like a thread that goes through it
Yes.
all. Oh, I love
Definitely,
that. I love that. And was that quite a deliberate choice?
It was a deliberate choice for me because I think I started KEAT at a time where I wanted to really split my multiple artistic endeavors. I mean, when you first interviewed me for music, back when I was an intern, I was pretty much, an opera singer. I was going down the opera route. There was that whole thing. And for that, I was using my government name, which is Jingjie. I didn't even go by JJ. JJ was just like an informal colloquial thing for people.
Yeah.
And then I started KEAT because I started writing a lot of music and I tried to kind of like produce some stuff on my own. And I wanted to separate the two, but I still wanted something that was connected to me.
Got it.
And something that kind of still lent a sense of meaning to myself, which is why I came out with KEAT, because it kind of made sense that, there was that connection. It wasn't just something that I plucked out of nowhere. I really, really wanted to drive in that slightly more cultural factor into it, even if I don't make Mando pop music, so to say, or I don't sing in Teochew. I think there is a part of me that is still Chinese, still Singaporean, still of a certain dialect, and I just really wanted to drive that in. Yeah.
And I love how it's all come together as well, because at first it was like, there's the JJ at work, and then there's the JJ, the musician, but I feel like it's all come together. And I think we first met probably around 6 years ago. It must have been like 2018. Yes. 2018, 2019.
2018 May, I believe.
Yeah. And you interviewed as like a music intern at Musiio, which is now part of SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Hence the full journey. And you'd been studying voice. That was kind of the JJ that I first met and knew.
And that was him.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really do much opera singing anymore. Like, singing is still part of my daily life.
But I like the fact you almost sound like you could, like it's in the back pocket.
No, it isn't.
Like you could just bust out.
It's now like a party trick. I just love going to a party and sometimes they're like, oh, so what sets you different? I'm like, hey, I'm JJ. I used to do opera. They're like, what? So like, it's been because I've been in Sweden. It's been so useful, like just to be like, oh yeah, so I used to do this. And you're like, oh wow. And so it's become a bit of a party trick. But I also think like, my music background and the way I was educated in the conservatory and going through all that year training, history training,
Yeah.
performance training, really kind of, it's a sum total of all these experiences that make you the artist that you eventually become.
Yeah.
And while I don't really sing with like classical piano or an orchestra or with a big choir behind me, I think there's still a lot of elements that that I can kind of bridge over to pop songwriting or
Yeah.
pop production. Yeah.
Did you enjoy your musical education in Singapore? Like when you were studying
Yeah.
sort of that 16, 17, 18 kind of age, that sort of
Yeah.
once you were specializing in
Yeah.
voice. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it in the early days, but after a while, it's not that I didn't enjoy it. I think I appreciate it as an art form. It's an art form that still holds a lot of meaning for me because, it represents me at a certain part of my life. And the music still touches me. It still evokes a certain sense of passion and emotion in me. I just don't feel like I am completely made for it. I
Right.
don't think my heart is there.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's a bad thing. I think it's just like sometimes you find your calling and you want to just find something that resonates deeply with you.
Yep.
I think back at that time, I was also kind of dealing with the fact that a lot of the big opera stars that I was looking at, a lot of the people that I was kind of consulting with or just looking out for tend to like to categorize me into a box very quickly. And as a queer singer, sometimes that can be very difficult to figure out.
Yeah.
It's difficult to figure yourself out and then figure yourself out as a musician at the same time.
Is opera quite macho?
I don't think it's macho. I think they're just very quick to put a certain label on you. But
Yeah.
that's also because you have to act. You have to play a certain role. You have to embody a certain level of a character.
Yeah.
And sometimes the physical attributes do kind of play a part to
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
The way in which you carry yourself does kind of play a part to
Yeah.
that. So, of course, opera has been reimagined, for years and years on end right now. And I think it's still going to be reimagined, which is great. But I think when I looked back at my journey, I accept that it is part of my journey that really built me into the artist that I am today.
Yeah.
But it's just not something that I want to do.
Yeah.
It's just something that it's a fun party trick for me, for one.
Okay, talking about the party trick though, what's the, when you're at the party,
Yeah.
and then it's known that you do the opera. So what's the piece that you jump to?
Oh, I will sing some Mozart.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll just sing some Mozart because like that's the song, the piece that has been drilled into me like for ages on end. I think it's from Don Giovanni. It was like it's like a serenading kind of aria, and I think he like maybe sings it to some girl at the window.
Yeah.
Something like that. So it's one of those like come to the
Okay.
window, come love me kind of thing.
That's the one you reach for. That's the one that's right there.
Yeah, and also because it's in a very comfortable range. So even when I'm drunk, I can do it.
Yeah.
Like it's perfect.
Is this the equivalent of having like a karaoke song?
Yes, I guess. I don't know. Because like for karaoke, I just pretty much do anything. I don't sing a karaoke.
Right.
Yeah, no one sings karaoke properly.
No, you don't have to. It's just mainly shouting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just as loud as possible.
Yeah, no, but I don't really have a karaoke song.
Fair, you don't need one.
Yeah, I don't need
You've
one.
got another party trick.
I
Put the
know.
mics down.
I
Go in a
know.
cappella.
I know. I don't even need a mic half the time. But I do have to say though, going from classical singing to pop singing, that
Yes.
has been quite an experience because
Also, I wanted to ask about this
Yeah.
because we're very lucky. I feel very lucky that you're in London today.
Aw,
And we're in London and we get to hang out and we
I
get to have a chat
know.
because you've just been in Sweden.
Yeah.
So bring us a little bit up to date with this modern pop music.
course.
What have you been up to in the last few weeks, the most recent
I
times?
have been through so much in the north of Sweden. So I applied for this program called the Tailored Development Program at the school called Musik Makarna. And it's part of the Songwriters Academy of Sweden. So how I even found out about this school was that I was listening to an artist over the pandemic and I really fell in love with her music. I really loved the way that she constructed her melodies and how the words just fit so well into every note that she was singing. Like it was hooky.
Yeah.
It made so much sense. Like it ended the way it should and it started the way it should. It was just gorgeous. And the production that was built around the song was so gorgeous as well. So I was kind of like, who is she? Like I want to find out where she studies.
Yeah.
And also because I think I was at the point where I'm like, I don't really know whether I want to do classical music anymore. Is there another way that I can find to maybe retrain, upskill, progress something in me, within the scope of songwriting? The artist's name is Leon. I forgot to even say that.
That's all right. We're gonna link to the artist now because I think everyone's gonna want to check her out.
She's great.
Yeah.
So I found out that she went to the school, and I googled the school, and I was like, oh wow, because I read a couple of her interviews and stuff. She broke out back in 20, like the mid 2010s ish.
And is she
15,
Swedish?
She is Swedish.
Got it, right, yeah.
And so she worked with another producer who came from that school as well.
Right.
And I was like, this school must be amazing. I kind of want to go there. But back then it was a pandemic. They didn't really run this program. Their usual program is completely in Swedish. But for the tailored development program, it's completely in English, and it's only for 3 months.
Yeah.
So I decided to apply. I got in, thankfully, and I left for Sweden in March. And the experience has been just so crazy, being in a place where a lot of the greats have walked the halls. You have people writing for like Ellie Goulding. You have people writing for Icon of Pop. I think Cobra went to that school as well. So it's kind of crazy to just be in that space,
Yeah.
to be like, oh my God, like so many people have started here and brought themselves into even bigger places. And I really just wanted to soak in the vibe and work with the students there, who were also very eager to make music. So honestly, I was just in the studio maybe 16 hours a day. Sometimes you go for class, and then you go back into the studio, you work on a brief, or you work on someone's artist project, or there's a certain like competition, like the Eurovision, like they want to enter the competition and they want a song for that.
So
you write that.
So how guided was it? Because obviously if you're in the studio for 6 hours, is it very prescriptive, like you're going to get 6 briefs a week, you're going to get X programs, or is it very much like, okay, you're in the studio, there's 10 hours in front of you, creative time? Like, how structured is it?
It's not very structured in the sense that it's not like going to Singaporean school, because when you go to Singaporean school, there's modules and you follow a schedule.
I'm laughing because I lived in Singapore.
Yeah, I know.
And I know exactly how things are run.
Yeah.
Which is to the letter.
Yes, to the letter. So you have this class from this time to this time, and then that class from that time to that time. That's kind of the system that I came from. But down there, it's more like on a Monday, we will meet in the big classroom, and then we will maybe have a chat with an A&R, or we'll have a chat with some sort of a representative from somewhere.
Yeah.
That says we're looking for this, we're looking for that. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes the teacher at the school just kind of briefs us on what the brief is going to be, or the lead is going to be for that week. Sometimes you know it beforehand, like the week before or many weeks before. Sometimes you just know it on the day itself. So we sit in the classroom, we talk a little bit, they break us into groups.
And how big is the full group?
So on the program itself, the international program that we like to just call it the international class. There are only 6 of us.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And we're from a whole variety of different countries. I have a friend from Malta, Netherlands, Switzerland, Finland, and a German guy who is based in Denmark, in Copenhagen.
Okay, but you are repping for Asia.
Yeah, I'm repping for Asia, yeah.
Okay,
so that was that was really, really interesting. But yeah, we all got along very well. We stayed in the same accommodation. So, there was a lot of music making, but there was also a lot of, just hanging out and understanding how we all saw music and how we all want to take our careers forward.
Yeah.
So that was very refreshing, just to see how driven everyone was and how ambitious everyone was at that. And they were so willing to just jump at the next opportunity. It was so amazing to just be in that energy and to be in a space where everybody just wants to get something done.
Yeah.
And I felt so lucky and so honored that I could even be in that space.
I do love these. It's sort of reminding me, it's sounding a bit like a summer camp.
It is.
Because you're all
Yeah.
living together and you're all working together
Yeah.
and you're all being creative together. And
Yeah.
the only thing I can think that it reminds me of a bit is when I started at Entrepreneur First, which is where we first
Yeah.
met,
Oh,
there was like
yeah.
100 of us
Yeah.
in the room for 6 months.
Yeah.
And of course, well, some of them did live together. I had my own place, but I kind of love that environment where you're just thrown into like a really intense scenario for like an extended period of time.
Yeah.
It's like instant best friends.
Yeah.
Or it can be.
Yeah.
You know.
No, and it's like you kind of get to tap on different people's opinions, criticisms in the best of ways,
Yeah.
to make something better.
Yeah.
You kind of learn how to discern what's opinion that works well for you and opinion that doesn't. And I mean, we
100%.
didn't just work within the six of us. There were projects that were just the six of us.
Yeah.
So we'll break into like 2 groups of 3s or 3 groups of 2s,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there was also like a substantial amount of time that we were working with the students at Makarna, and also the other 2 schools that were there. So actually, in this school
Yeah.
is in the north of Sweden,
Right.
and I'm not even gonna. The place is called Örvik. I'm just gonna
Okay.
use the short form name because I cannot. I've been there for 3 months and I still struggle
I'm
to
going
say
to
the
check
name.
in with the Swedish High Council. No, I'm not.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one. So in Örvik, there are 3 schools there: Dream Hill Music Academy, Songwriting for an International Market, or short form, we just call it SIM, and Makarna. So these 3 schools are kind of like they kind of do the same thing but have different kinds of structures.
Right.
Yeah, some are a little bit more like you really go to school, you have an assignment, you work on your artist project in your
Yeah.
own time kind of thing. Some are a little bit more like we have a different brief every single week, that kind of thing. So we got to work with different students from all these different schools and we were part of that community.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so maybe there was like a whole like 80 of us there.
So, well, and I follow you on Instagram.
Oh yeah.
So anyone can follow you, KEAT,
Yeah.
on Instagram.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've had a bit of a behind the scenes
Yeah.
studio tour for the
Yeah.
last few months because I'm always like, oh, it's JJ in the studio. I'm going to check it out. But for those who haven't been following you on Instagram yet, and we will link to you, what's one of your favorite briefs or projects that you have worked on in the last few months? Something that maybe's come from somewhere that it just wouldn't have happened if you'd been still in Singapore.
Oh, okay. So with regards to this one, up until the point that I got to Sweden, I primarily only wrote in English or for English, kind of like, for the lack of a better word, Western-oriented music.
Yeah.
So like, music that was written in English for like a primarily English-speaking kind of community.
Like Western pop
Yeah,
is
Western
how I would
pop.
describe
Yeah. Like
your previous music.
it had a little bit of like I tried to put on a little bit of like the Swedish pop production spin. Wasn't very successful at it because because I wasn't working with any Swedish, right?
Yeah.
But I was, very inspired by people like Troye Sivan, The
Yeah.
Midnight, Jessie Ware,
Yeah.
all these people who 1975. I really wanted like that kind of synthy sound.
Yeah.
And those were the kinds of music that I submitted to get into the program.
Right, okay.
Because I released an album last year in October, end of October last
Yep.
year. And it was just like music that was inspired from that era that I was really listening out to them. So I used some of the songs from there to enter the school. Thankfully was successful for it. And then I got there, and when I was going to Sweden, I didn't actually think that I wanted to continue my artist project anymore.
Right.
I was kind of at a space where I was like, maybe this isn't really something I really want to do. Like because I realized that in the process of making my album, what was the most fun for me was being in the studio,
Yeah.
being creative with people around me, like changing the melody, like figuring out a different way to sing something, figuring out different microphones,
Yeah.
these kinds of like things. I was enjoying that process so much, and I was kind of like, not that I wasn't enjoying being on stage, but I think there was a level of anxiety that made me not really want to be on stage all the time.
Yeah.
Like there was a part of me that really was like, actually I kind of just want to write songs, and that was something I enjoyed. So I kind of was trying to figure that out when I was going to Sweden. But of course, if a performance opportunity comes my way, I'm not going to say no. But it's just that I was trying to figure out what the next step was going to be.
Well, I think you have to find your way in it, as in any career, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can try lots of careers. I mean, even I know just from working in music tech, like I've had jobs where there have been elements of it that I've enjoyed more, elements that I've enjoyed less.
Yes.
You know, because like at one point I was almost pretty much full-time videographer.
Yeah.
And I find video editing a bit of a slog. You know, but I love the recording and the what process.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you have to do both.
You do.
It's called a job for a reason.
You do, yeah.
But then sometimes as you get a bit older, you start to figure out which part of it
Yep.
you actually get the most out of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly that. So I was going through something of that process.
Yeah.
You know, I think being an artist made me happy because I had a message to share.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was kind of like, I don't know. Like, I just like writing songs, and that was the fun bit. And that was all I wanted to do. Genuinely, I just wanted to write songs. That was my main goal.
Yeah.
So I went over, and the thing that caught me by surprise was that I started writing for K-pop.
Oh.
So that was an interesting development in my career, in my life, that I didn't think that I would get to.
Now it is as well, because K-pop is so popular in Singapore.
I know.
So popular in Singapore.
I mean, it's so popular everywhere.
Korean culture in general.
I know,
It's
yeah.
just is global almost, I would say. Exactly. So what kind of drew you into the K-pop? Are you writing in Korean?
No, so we don't write in Korean. I didn't even know that I could write for K-pop.
Right.
I didn't even know that my melodies and my hooks were suitable for K-pop. You know, it wasn't until I got the first brief for K-pop and I was working with some people who were also first timers at K-pop, but we made a song that we were really, really happy with. And that was when I had the first it kicked in, and I was like, huh? Maybe I could do this.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, K-pop is very big in Singapore, and it's very big across the world, but it wasn't really something that I actively listened to, at least up until the point I went to Sweden.
Yeah.
So I kind of was in a point in a situation where I was like, oh, this is very interesting, because I didn't think that it would feel this familiar.
Oh.
You know? And so we obviously got a lot more K-pop briefs after that as well.
Yeah, right.
And so we just continued.
It went well.
Yeah, it went well. We just continued writing and writing and writing. And as I continued writing, I got better at getting my ideas down a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And also working in a room with other people who are equally as passionate about K-pop.
Yeah.
That was also such an amazing, it's just so amazing to see how people can spin different melodies.
So is it something about the hooks and the structure that you have to do differently when approaching a K-pop
Yes. It's a little bit more ADHD. It's a little bit more like ADHD, a little bit more different things come into play.
Yeah.
Things change a lot more frequently. And so there's in my opinion at least, there's slightly greater need to have more hooks. It's
Right.
really just hook central for me when I see
Okay.
it. It's just you throw in as many as possible, and you just try to find a way to work things out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very interesting process, because I think in Western pop music, we tend to kind of let the vibes speak a little bit more as well.
Okay, yeah.
Things have to be hooky still. A good pop song still is going to be very hooky. But I think the need for that kind of like a almost steroidal level of hooks, is something that's a lot more K-pop driven.
What about the rhyming structures?
Yeah. So we don't write in Korean.
Right.
Because obviously none of us speak Korean.
Right.
So we primarily write it in English, and we have a concept in English. And then when we send it out to a publisher who's maybe connected to the K-pop world, or the J-pop world, or even the Mandopop world, if they like it, they translate it over there.
Right.
Yeah. So you kind of write it primarily in English, and you can have like a cool concept or a cool song title, as with a lot of K-pop songs these days.
Yep.
Or even J-pop songs. They have all these cool titles that maybe it's someone's name, maybe it's a certain situation, maybe it's a long 4-syllable English word, that they can kind of throw in every now and then. So you kind of write around that kind of a concept.
Yeah.
And they translate it after that. But what that means is that when you write it in English, you kind of also sometimes have to balance it out by using as by writing it as simply as possible.
Right.
Because the Korean language or East Asian languages like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, they are very character heavy.
Right.
And so it's great that I understand Mandarin because it's not to say it's the same, but there are some sense of a similarity in terms of the fact that everything is just character by character.
Yeah.
You know, and you see them in different characters, and that's how you kind of figure out a word or a sentence. And so having that kind of knowledge definitely shaped the way I use the English language to write a song that I know it's going to be translated into Korean later or translated into Japanese later.
Yeah.
Because it makes you think about it in terms of the syllables.
Almost like modular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot more modular. You have to be like, okay, I can say this, but I also need to make sure that this is going to be able to translate well.
Yeah.
You know, I need to be very careful with my word choices. It's not just any simple word that I can use, you know, or even if I do want to throw in a big word for conceptual purposes, I have to be very careful about that. It can't just be any random word that I pluck out the dictionary, you know? You kind of have to be very intentional about that.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because it's so interesting to write, to use a lot of what we kind of sometimes see as filler words.
Okay.
You know? But use it in a very intentional manner because you know that it's going to help you bridge a certain message or a certain thing that you want to say in the song. And it's also going to work well in a translated concept.
Yeah.
And you know, these days for K-pop, J-pop, Mandopop, they often also like to release a Korean version and an English version.
Right.
So you also never really know whether or not you're going to end up using your English version, and you want to be a bit more careful about that.
So you have to make the English version good. You're not it's not just dashed away thinking, oh, it'll get translated. This could be a real and final version, but also writing it with in mind that it needs to be something that if translated, you have an understanding of East Asian languages.
Exactly.
So it can work.
Exactly.
Oh,
so
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to discover that for myself, you know, because I mean, I don't speak the best of Mandarin, and this is not something that I'm particularly proud about, given that I went to school for 12 years and I should be able to speak my mother tongue.
Well, this is a whole nother story. And when I very first moved to Singapore, I worked with a Chinese Singaporean guy who said one of the challenges we have in Singapore is that we might go to school and exclusively speak English, and we're living at home with Chinese-speaking parents who do not speak English. So we're spending half of our lives speaking Chinese, half of our lives speaking English, neither one understanding the other.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, you know, my colleague felt that he had an incomplete understanding of both.
Okay.
And I'm sure that's not applicable to everyone, but it did give me an understanding of or trying to understand what it must be like to study in a language that is not the language you speak at home.
Yeah, but I think it also differs from generation to generation.
Absolutely.
You know, because my parents spoke to me primarily in English.
Right.
And my parents are the ones who's proficient in both Mandarin and English.
Right.
And also the dialect, because my grandparents can't speak English.
Got it.
They only speak Mandarin and the dialect.
So I think my previous colleague was more likely your parents' generation.
Yeah, there's a very high likelihood that's the case.
Yeah.
But for people who are kind of in like the millennials, the Gen Zs, you know, we tend to speak, and this is not to say it's the case for everyone, but at least in my circles, we kind of speak a little bit more English. And you do get a lot of people who are very, very proficient in both, which is great. But for me, I think like even when my parents speak to me in Mandarin occasionally, I still respond to them in English.
But you're understanding them.
Yeah, but
so
I understand.
You are a step ahead of a lot.
Yeah, but that's also such an interesting trait to have.
Yeah.
Which I didn't give a thought about until I got to Sweden, you know, to write the songs. I mean, we've always talked about how, you know, Singapore is a melting pot of cultures. It's very diverse. You know, it has all these different ethnicities and races that are being celebrated every day. And we talk about how Singapore is very East meets West. You know, it's a very good place to go to kind of get a decent enough understanding of Asia, but also it's largely a very, Western-oriented city, at least until a certain point in time.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, I always was very acutely aware of the fact that this is a East meets West kind of place. I mean,
Right.
we
Really?
used that. Yeah,
You
yeah.
felt that even from growing up?
Yeah, because I don't know, maybe it's also because of the schools I went to, we do get the kind of discourse about this.
Yeah.
Whether or not, because I think understanding culture as a Singaporean is such an interesting and fascinating affair.
Yeah.
Given that, we are ethnically Chinese, that is where my ancestral roots are. But, I'm also Singaporean.
And you
I
mentioned
speak
your
more
grandparents
English.
who only speak the dialect.
Yeah.
Do they live in Singapore as
They
well?
were born, they were born in Singapore.
Right,
But my
okay.
great-grandparents were from China.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it has been a couple generations in.
Yeah.
But, the way...
Each one's been different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, the way in which culture affects the way you see yourself and therefore the way you write music, those things kind of...
Right.
It's so interconnected. You can't really have a conversation about music without having a conversation about culture, without having a conversation about how you understand yourself.
Yeah.
They're all something... It comes from you. And...
especially with songwriting, more so than
Exactly.
even just,
Yeah.
enjoying music as a listener.
Yeah.
It's and I wrote down something you said earlier because I absolutely loved it when you were talking about writing songs and you said you have a message to share.
Yeah.
And that I really thought when it comes to the music that you're writing and from your experience in Sweden, a lot of it is informed by who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why it was... I didn't think that it was such a strength to come from a place where both cultures, of the East and the West, so to say, broadly speaking, I'm not trying to generalize, but, for convenience sake in this conversation, coming from a society that's that embraces both sides, really, really helped me in Sweden, at least when it came to, talking to people in English and having... and communicating to people in English and writing with them in that language, and then also writing for an Asian market.
Yeah.
Because you already embody, a lot of these different traits.
Yeah. Well, you get the benefits of having a bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, as Hannah Montana says it, best of both worlds,
And out
I
comes
felt
the
that
wig.
way.
No.
Yeah. The fan, No, but I definitely felt that. And I think while I was very aware of my identity as a Singaporean and as someone who was, deeply connected with, both cultures, I didn't realize how big of an impact it would have made on my songwriting. It just somehow didn't occur to me until one day I think I was talking to one of the other internationals. We were just kind of it was just like a leisurely stroll home. And we were talking about developing niches or developing specializations within the scope of songwriting, where we want to see ourselves, how we want to position ourselves. And I was like, I don't really know, I don't really know how to see this. And she was like, what are you talking about? Don't you, it's already there. And I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean it's there? And she was like, don't you see that you already you're able to bridge both together.
Yeah.
And that is such a strong trait to have.
Maybe you didn't realize it until you were in a country that is not the country you're from.
I think so, yeah.
Being outside of Singapore in Sweden. Because when I first met you in Singapore and you're a Singaporean citizen, singer-songwriter, you don't realize what that means because it's just who you are.
Yeah.
You're just doing it anyway.
Exactly that. Because I think Singapore is Singapore. You're sitting in a culture that everything already... It's familiar to you. It's comforting.
Yeah.
So you obviously don't go and question a lot of these things. You do question it to a certain extent, but you don't really get these realizations that you will from an objective point of view when you're out of the country. So being in Sweden has been so good because on the musical front, I realized I could write very well for the Asian market, which works perfectly because at least up until now, I'm still very heavily based in Asia. And, it also helped me realize my identity as a musician from Singapore as well.
Yeah.
And it really makes you see, actually, you still have a lot to offer. You know, it's
Absolutely.
a small country, you know,
Yeah.
of course. You know, it's a very small country, and it does take a certain amount of effort for you to continue at your artistic endeavor to even, you know, find a level of success that you're happy with. But I think it nonetheless still allowed me to understand myself in a way that I would have never been able to if I had just stayed in Singapore for those 3 months. And it's like, those were just 3 months. Can you imagine, like, if it was more than that? Like,
Yeah.
what other things I would discover about myself?
Yeah.
So it was such a shape-shifting time, you know, to just be exposed to, like, K-pop, Eurovision writing, writing for different artists of different styles. I wrote my first country song. I didn't ever.
I could see you as a country songwriter. Can you? I can. Like, who doesn't love a bit of Dolly Parton?
No, but that's true. So we did kind of like write a country song that was very like Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Or
vibe.
are you a Swiftie?
I'm not that much a Swiftie.
No, well, neither am I. Okay, we can
Yeah.
move on from that.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, because I could see you doing some of the like early Taylor stuff as well.
So the song came out sounding like an early Taylor, and I was like, and I mean, I loved early Taylor.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like I think like that's when I was a teen. I was growing up. I was listening to all her music, and I was like you know, like it made such an impact on me that I think it's somewhere in me.
Oh, and you're going to take those influences from everywhere.
Yeah.
You're going to be inspired by all of that.
Exactly that.
And I wanted to touch on something else as well. I know you mentioned already in our discussion that you identify as a queer musician.
Yes.
Is that how you introduce yourself? And what does that part of your identity bring to your songwriting?
Oh, it brings so much. So, obviously, being a queer person in Singapore never ever is that easy. It's not as difficult as it used to be when I first came out.
Yeah.
So I have to acknowledge that significant progress has been made, you know, and it's also very good when you have it's also very good when you have a support system with you.
Yes.
You know, and you have people that you can depend on. And so that definitely changes things, and I have to acknowledge the privilege that I have to even be able to be in situations where things don't go well, but I still thankfully have a support system for myself.
Yeah.
So I am going to eternally be grateful for that, regardless of however my life pans out. But
And is that the community?
yeah,
And like, do you feel there's like a strong gay community in Singapore? And is there a real sense of solidarity?
I think it's growing and it's getting there.
Right.
And also because popular culture these days is so embracing of diverse, like, you know, this idea of like diversity and inclusion, you know, that kind of thing. And conversations regarding queer issues, you know, LGBTQ communities across the world, you know, that has kind of been not researching, but like coming up from time to time. And then with things like TikTok, like social media, you know, being at full force, you get to hear different perspectives and different stories very quickly. And so what I think that builds is a whole new generation of people who are a lot more open to talk about it. And therefore, it's going to move things in the right direction.
Yeah.
You know, move things in a direction that's going to be a lot more inclusive, going to be a lot more equal, hopefully. Going to be a lot more equitable for everybody as well.
Well, maybe we're more likely to hear other people's stories.
Yeah.
Because we have things like social media, which obviously it's not perfect. Not every element is good, but maybe we can hear and see stories that we never would have experienced before.
Yeah.
You know, for people who don't live in Asia, they may see queer stories or gay stories on TikTok or on Instagram that they would just not have understood the experience before. So maybe it can broaden all of our horizons in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so being a queer musician in Singapore, you know, on that topic, it has its complexities. I think, like, I mean, this is gonna get real personal, but and I'm fine with it. You know,
I'm here for it
because I mean, this is my story, and I want to share it. You know, I mean, you've always known me as a very openly queer person, openly gay person. I've never once felt like I had to hide it, which is, you know, always great. But I think, like, on a music front, I think there was a part of me that never really dared to like take it completely to the forefront, to the point that I could be like KEAT is a queer musician from Singapore.
Right.
You know? So, yes, I am queer, and yes, you can see that. But I don't think I've ever been publicly exclamative about it. You know, I would not I didn't really say that. And I think there was something in that made me look deeper into myself, you know, as to why that one identity was a little bit more difficult to come to terms to. And I think this is a queer journey that a lot of people go through.
Okay, yeah.
You know, given the fact that you always live your life in the way where you live your life by other people's terms and not your own. You know, because you grow up through a society where people tell you maybe it's wrong. You grow up in a place where people discriminate you for it, where people maybe could even go to the extent of not wanting to be your friend because of it. You know, so you grow up being someone else because it's a survival instinct. You know, you feel the need to build another persona just so that you can survive.
Yeah.
And so being queer in Singapore, and then also being a musician in Singapore who's also queer, kind of it's like a always changing journey. There's like 1,001 things to think about at any one point.
Yep.
But at least up until this point, I know that I'm queer. I'm open about it, but I've never been on a public platform where I'm like, I'm gay. You know? Right. I've never done that before. I might have maybe made an allusion about like, oh, this is a heartbreak about this guy that I was seeing. Yeah, maybe I've seen that. Right. But I've never actually really uttered the words I'm queer or I'm gay ever in my, you know, like my public artist profile.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there was just something about, you know, being in Singapore and being in a space where sometimes you kind of have to be a bit more careful about it, despite the fact that you have a support system. Sometimes you have to worry about whether or not, like, if I center my music around my queer identity, am I going to be labeled too much?
Yeah.
Am I going to be, like, pushing this too much?
Yeah.
Which is also another ludicrous question to ask, because, like, what does too much even mean?
And I moved to Singapore back in, like, 2016.
Oh, yeah.
When, you know, you really had to, you know, look at the legality of being gay and what does this mean? How does this impact you know, various sort of policies and job opportunities and things like that. And I know that, you know, we're in 2024 now. Yeah. I love to see the changes. I love to see it moving forward. Slow but steady.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we are moving in the right direction. And we are trying our best to make Singapore the place that we want it to be. Because I think queer people in Singapore deserve that space equally as much as anyone else does.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
We work for the same economy. We pay the same taxes.
Yeah.
We live with everyone else and we are part of that community.
And I was just thinking as well, like, I think because when I moved there, I am British. So I am very Western. And so I think when I moved to Singapore and I was starting a company, I was just like, come in one, come in all. Like, welcome to our company. And so when I met you, of course, I would have never in an interview question asked your sexual orientation or how you identified. However, you were always very open and I just wanted to welcome you. You were as welcome as everybody else in our company. But we used to attract people who almost were not the right fit for some of the more traditional companies. And I'm remembering, I'm not going to name them, but one person in particular brought me in their Singaporean school report card one day because they wanted to show me that all of their reports were just ask too many questions, talks too much, questions too much, disobedient, won't be told. And I was like, those are all the things that I value in this person. Because I need someone who's going to ask me questions all the time. We're building artificial intelligence. We need to figure it out. So I actually think there was a real power in having, all these people who kind of don't fit in elsewhere. This we're building something.
No, precisely that. And it's so nice that you brought that up because that is something that I'm still struggling with.
Right.
Which I know a lot of people might be like, no, you yap so much. There's no way this is a problem for you. And I'm like, no, but it is actually a problem for me.
Did you get those report cards as well?
No, I didn't really get the report cards, but I was always too quiet in school, I feel. You know, I was always at the point where I knew I kind of felt like sometimes asking too many questions wasn't really the best of things.
Oh, yeah.
Which is now also reflected in that report card story.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was a point where you just kind of get afraid of asking questions.
Yeah.
Because you are afraid of looking stupid.
Yep.
Or being shut down.
Yeah.
And that kind of like system really gets ingrained in you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remember as well, because the first company I worked for before I set up Musiio, I'd often be in a meeting with maybe 10 Singaporeans and myself. And, the big boss would explain something. And I know for a fact nobody's understood. And because I can see on everyone's face that no one wants to be the one to go, sorry, could you just repeat that? I haven't got a clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I would be that person. Because I don't think it's necessarily a British thing. I think it's a me thing. But I also think it's quite an American thing or a Western character. I just don't mind asking the stupid question. I don't mind saying, I don't know.
Which is so
What's
great.
going on?
No, but that's so great because I think that's what fosters learning. That's what fosters things to go forward.
Yeah. But for whatever reason, that concept of saving face is, even with millennials and Gen Z, still really ingrained in Singaporean
It's very
culture.
ingrained in that. So that was also something that I had to face when I was in Sweden.
Right.
So when I was working for you, I was also struggling with that because I was like, oh my God, I've never done this before. It's suddenly such a new environment to be in. What do I do? What do I ask? And up to today, I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah.
Then I went to Sweden, and I was still like, the same thing came back. What do I ask? What do I say? What do I, and it's not like I have nothing to ask. Most of the time I do.
Yeah.
But I think it's just something about having that culture being ingrained in me that now it's just so difficult to undo it, So it really takes me an active effort to come out to be like, hey, this is my question. Sorry, I have to kind of make you repeat yourself, but I have to clarify.
Yeah.
You know? So
But I think that makes you incredibly brave because not only is it a difficult thing for most people to do, you already know that you've been trained to do the opposite, and yet you still do it.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fighting your instincts in that sense.
Yeah.
Because you're always like, don't ask so many questions. But I'm trying to get into the habit of asking more questions, you know, at least in a studying or working kind of type setting, and being a little bit more shameless about that, because, might as well just be me if I've lived all my life, people telling you shouldn't do this.
I feel like for your career, you could head to the US next, and they will definitely give you that little sprinkle of confidence. The Americans are known for it.
Oh yeah,
you could do that.
I know.
I think you could.
Yeah.
I think you could. Okay, so so that's next on the list. I'm going to write that down. New York for JJ. But I wanted to just end on a question around aspirations.
Yeah.
So, I'm so excited for you. I'm going to keep following you on Instagram and I'm going to see what you get up to. And hopefully you'll play a show in London and that way I can come along.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But in terms of your future aspirations as an artist and a songwriter, who would you most like to write for? What's the dream? Wish list. You can pick anyone.
Wish list. Oh, I would love to write with Mark Ronson.
Yeah?
I would love to write with Mark Ronson. Mark Ronson, if you're watching this, I would really love to work with you.
You know, he used to have a studio in Talyard.
He did?
He did. I don't know. We're going to have to, let's go and do a little snoop afterwards and try and find out which is his studio.
Yeah, but Mark Ronson for me is one of the greats. I think he's made so much good music. He's made so much good music with other artists who I listen to, like Adele, Amy Winehouse, Dua Lipa, Miley Cyrus. He's just amazing.
He's kind of like the ultimate collaborator, isn't he?
He is. And he has this really 80s aesthetic to him.
Yeah.
That's so it's so reflective, but it's also so modern at the same time.
Yeah. And
so for me, it's Mark Ronson. Mark Ronson's he's the guy.
Okay.
I would love to work with him. I also would love to work with S.G. Lewis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, love to work. I'm a big fan of his work. I've been following him since 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And I've been following how he has progressed as a DJ and a producer, and and I just love his music. It's so, again, very disco oriented, very synth, lots of like remixes, but also a lot of like, there's just a lot of like electronic elements to it, but still presented in a super pop, dancey kind of way. And it's just a vibe, and yeah, so these two people are people that I would really love to be in a room with them someday.
The dream. Well, we will link to their profiles and their tracks on SoundCloud so other people can check them out and can hear all the sounds you're inspired by.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for coming in today.
No, but thank you for having me. This
what an
was so
amazing
fun.
catch up.
I know.
Yeah. Good times. Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, JJ, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.